What's up guys, Kennex announced two paddles this year that were teased off and on, the ProSpin Plus and the Black Ace Pro. When the ProSpin Plus was finally released, they made a huge deal about the strings underneath the surface. They claimed it was the highest spinning paddle on the market, and their marketing material made the raised strings look much larger than they actually were. When people received the ProSpin Plus, they noticed it was much harder to see and feel the strings than anticipated. John Koo Pickleball and myself did RPM tests on the paddle, and it came between 1450 and 1500 RPM for both of us, which is certainly nothing exceptional. Once the Black Ace was announced for 250, I believe everyone was very skeptical of any claim about this paddle being good after seeing the results of the ProSpin Plus marketing. After extensively testing the Black Ace, there are a few pros and cons to consider, but it all depends on your style as a player, so let's talk about it. For the specs, we have a 10mm polymer paddle, Toray T700 carbon fiber face, 5.3-inch octagon handle with a 4-inch grip circumference, a weight of around 8 ounces, and a swing weight of 100. One thing I've always found appealing about Kennex paddles is that their swing weights are very low. While it is 10 points heavier than the ProFlight, it is still very easy to maneuver. And just for your own reference, a Ben Johns Hyperion is around 127, and most elongated paddles fall between 113 and 118 or so. At the time of writing this review, there's also an ovation shape, which is an oval head and a slightly longer 5.4-inch handle. They chopped off part of the head and just gave it to the handle. I didn't really end up testing this one just because, honestly, looking at the shape, it's highly unappealing to me, but I don't think there's a large difference between either of them. They do make some claims about the oval shape possibly having a better sweet spot and a few other things, but personally, I just like the standard shape, so that's what I ended up using. I believe in the near future, Kennex will also be announcing 2 other versions, one of them with an even longer handle, so if that's something of interest to you, you may want to hold out just a little bit longer, but at the time of recording this, I don't have a release date for you. With that being said, I also didn't really find that I had any issues doing a two-handed backhand on the 5.3-inch handle. Of every paddle I have reviewed, I don't know if I've ever seen more division over categorizing a paddle than the Black Ace. If you ask me, this paddle is all power. It couldn't be more opposite of a control paddle, but as I've looked at opinions online and a few other reviews, I noticed in the comments that people are highly divided about this paddle. Some people believe it's very controllable and much more manageable to use than a Power Air, while others share the opinion of mine, thinking that it's all power and is very hard to control. In fact, I swing so far in that direction that after using the Black Ace, I found the Power Air and 002 incredibly easy to dink with and control, which is not something I thought I would ever say. None of them are control paddles by any means. They're all still power paddles, but once you go from the Black Ace to the 002 or Power Air, I didn't find it nearly as hard to use. In fact, after using the Black Ace, the 002 and Power Air almost have this soft feel to them because the Black Ace is so stiff and harsh. It's kind of like a springboard, but just very stiff when you hit the ball. The feel is pretty jarring if you come from other raw carbon fiber paddles, and because of this, I found it very hard to control my third shot drops, my resets, and those shots were just horribly frustrating for the first few days, resulting in me just driving the ball a lot because I couldn't really do the other shots. However, the more I used the paddle, the easier those shots became. It isn't as easy to reset as my 003, but that's honestly expected when the 003 is double in thickness. I think this is where some of the division comes in for categorizing this paddle. If you're someone who likes not having to swing much for resets, drops, and blocks, then this paddle is fantastic. But if you're like me, where you're used to putting a little bit into those shots, then the Ace feels uncontrollable because this paddle just doesn't need the extra help to send the ball back into the court. You're effectively launching the ball by putting any swing into softer shots. Your experience with the soft game might be completely different than mine. Ultimately, it's going to come down to preferences and body mechanics, which may lead someone to lean one way or another when talking about how controllable it is. But for me, I'm confident in calling this the most powerful legal paddle on the market. And yes, I know it's weird that I had to preface legal, but when I mentioned it in another short video, people were saying, well, what about the Diadem Vice? Didn't you think that was the most powerful paddle? And yes, I do still think that's probably one of the most powerful paddles on the market, but it's also not legal, which is not something I thought I would have to clarify in any of my reviews, but I guess that's where we're at now. So yes, I think it's the most powerful legal paddle on the market. Something else you'll notice right away is that the sound is very different from everything else. Not only does it sound different, but this paddle is really, and I mean really loud. When playing with people, almost every single time, someone comments that it is noticeably louder than other paddles. I downloaded an app on my phone to measure decibel levels, and here were some of the results bouncing a ball up and down on my paddle. The Hyperion 16mm came in at 74.6 decibels on average. The Power Air was 75.2. The Hyperion 14mm was 76.9. The Gearbox CX11 Power 8.5Q was 77.2. The Onyx Z5 was 81.2. And the Black Ace came in at a whopping 83 decibels flat. Doing some brief Googling, I found that a 10 decibel increase is perceived as roughly twice as loud by humans. So as you can see, the Black Ace is nearly 10 decibels higher than the Hyperion. It's also louder than the king of noise, the Onyx Z5. I didn't even know it was possible to make a paddle that is louder than that thing. So yes, keep in mind, if you're going to buy this paddle, that it is very loud and people are going to comment on it. And if you live in an area that is sensitive to the noise of pickleball, then this paddle is going to be someone's worst nightmare. I also want people to keep in mind that this is not a highly scientific test. It's just that everyone kept mentioning how loud it was. So I wanted to find a quick test I could do to just show you roughly how loud it is. Spin is really fascinating on the Black Ace. The RPM tested at 1660 RPM, which is a great result, but in actual play, I found it felt worse. Because this paddle has so much pop to it, there's very little dwell time, and you have to be much more specific about how you hit your shots to get the ball to grab on the paddle and generate the spin you want. My usual serve that I do, I found it going long my first few games, so I had to make one of two adjustments. Hit very flat on the serves, or brush very aggressively and don't strike the ball quite as hard. Outside of serves, roll volleys and drives were the next place I noticed having issues. So many of my shots were going out long and not dropping in because of the extra pop. The word I kept going back to while testing the paddle was that it's hard to put any shape on the ball, at least with my usual strokes for all of my shots. Compared to other raw carbon fiber paddles or the Power Air, those all felt very easy to shape the ball for any shot that I wanted, but on the Black Ace, it was pretty difficult. Eventually, I did adjust and felt that I could get some pretty good spin, but overall, it felt easier to achieve the spin I wanted on a number of other paddles on the market right now. Kennex paddles come equipped with what they call Kinetic technology. If you aren't familiar with it, it's a bunch of tiny beads inside of chambers in the paddle that are supposed to eliminate shock and vibration to your arm. The claim that many people make is that this will help players who have tennis elbow. Unfortunately, I don't currently have tennis elbow, so I can't tell you how effective or not effective this is, but many players in the game swear it solved their issue. There's also an MIT study that constantly gets referenced, and I'll leave that linked down in the description if you want to check it out. New with the Black Ace, they've also added beads to the handle to further decrease shock because of how much pop this paddle has. After using this paddle a lot, I feel more vibrations than I do on my Hyperion 16mm or other damp raw carbon fiber paddles. Without having a version of the Black Ace with no beads, it's hard to say how effective the technology is. So take that all for what it's worth to you, but that is something that Kennex puts in their technology, and many people say it works very well. I find the sweet spot on the Black Ace to be a little bit below average. It reminds me of when I reviewed the 002. When you hit out of center, there's a huge drop off in how the paddle feels and sounds. Hit near the edges and the ball is going to die very quickly. It's jarring both in feel and sound. I know some people who appreciate that feedback from a paddle, but for me, it's not very appealing. I did end up adding lead tape up the throat and all the way up to the edge guard in hopes that it would help the paddle feel more solid and forgiving. I added 5 strips of lead tape on each side, bringing the paddle weight up to 8.6 ounces. This definitely made a nice impact on the paddle's feel for the soft game. It wasn't a night and day difference, but it was noticeable, and I would prefer to use the paddle with the lead tape than without it. The great thing about this is the paddle's swing weight is so low to begin with that even adding all of this weight hardly brought the swing weight up at all. It went from 100 to 105. So even with all of that weight, it's still lower than many stock paddles on the market when it comes to swing weight. I want to talk about durability quickly because in a podcast episode, I mentioned thoughts about the Spades decal. When I first saw it, I thought it would be possible for the decal to come up. However, I don't think that will be an issue after having the paddle in my hand for a bit and using it. In my time reviewing paddles, I have hardly heard any negative things about Pro Kenex's build quality. The one potential downfall I have seen looking around the internet is a few people reporting dents on their Black Ace face. In recent memory, I can't think of any paddle that has had denting issues, so I don't know if this is going to be a widespread issue or not, but it is something you should keep in mind if you start to see more reports of it. Now, even though the decal does seem to be pretty durable and I don't foresee it being an issue coming up, I do still think it's kind of ugly. I understand why they did it. They have a tennis racket called the Black Ace, and it's a bit of a nod to that, but overall, I just don't find the design appealing. When you go to the pickleball court, it's not a design contest, but I don't know, when I look at it, it does just kind of have a cheap look or feel to it.
What's up, guys? Today I got to use the Pro Kennex Black Ace. I started using it and probably after about like half a game decided I absolutely hated the paddle and did not want to test it anymore. There's no control. It's only power. Compared to the Yola I use, which I have weighted up to 10 ounces, this at 8 ounces with no lead tape literally shakes in your hand. But compared to any other paddle without lead tape, hits like a truck. So I didn't really like that because it's like different compared to other paddles. Wherever it's pointing, literally it will just go that way. So if you're like flat, it's going into the net every time. And that's not really how I play. I tend to roll and arc my shots a little more. So adjusting to it was a little hard, but once you get used to it, I think it can be really good if you like to play fast. If you get in long rallies, odds are you're probably going to make a mistake before somebody using more of a control and more forgiving paddle. If you're playing fast, it's good. If you're playing long rallies and waiting out the point, maybe not the paddle for you. Compared to a paddle with the same lead tape setup, I've got it here on the head, on both corners, and then I've got it on the throats here. Same as my Yola. It actually doesn't hit as hard as the Yola with the lead tape setup. It's a little lighter, but it doesn't plow through the ball as well as the Yola does with the lead tape, but it still hits really hard. So in that realm, there's no complaints there. But even with the lead tape, it didn't really add the stability that I like to have typically. So for that reason, I probably won't use it. Maybe for mixed, but probably not for mixed either. But we'll see. You never know.
I didn't expect to enjoy this paddle. In fact, my first few play tests, I didn't care for it at all. But the more I used it, the more I liked it. During my testing, I was rotating the Black Ace with other paddles, and every time I stopped using it, I wanted to go back. The hand speed and extra pop at the net became very appealing. Also, the resets and thirds became much easier every single time I went out and played. I don't think that it's ever going to be as easy as some of the control paddles on the market, but I started finding it manageable enough that the other benefits of the paddle started to outweigh the cons. It's going to take a few more play sessions to decide if this will replace my 003, but even if it doesn't, I think the Black Ace might be in my top 5 favorite paddles right now. If you're considering the paddle though, here are my pros and cons for you to think about before you purchase it. 1, it's the hardest hitting paddle with the lowest swing weight on the market. This makes it very appealing for players who need a light paddle but still want a lot of power. Because of the low swing weight, you can customize heavily with lead tape without increasing the swing weight too much. I could probably bring this paddle up to about 9.5 ounces and it would still feel easier to swing than a Hyperion 16mm. Also, your hands are just ridiculously fast because of the low swing weight to begin with, which is a huge plus in pickleball. 2, it has high spin potential. While it takes specific strokes or play styles to unlock the full potential, it is generally solid. Some people will have an easier time achieving that spin than others, but it's not bad and is something that I think people are going to appreciate having. 3, great build quality. The handle is an octagon, it feels great in hand, and as mentioned previously, I've heard minimal issues about Pro Kennex build quality. Again, there still might be the denting issue, but I've only seen 2, maybe 3 incidents of this, so it's way too early to say if that's actually going to be a widespread issue. 4, the Kinetic technology. I can't prove or disprove this, but if it does work as claimed, then that is a great technology that no one else is using, and is something they should be applauded for when we live in a sea of copycats. Edgeless design with a built-in replaceable top bumper. This means no more loose edgeguard issues, which is probably the highest defect of any paddle today. Now let's talk about the cons. 1, it's expensive. For $250, there are a lot of great paddles on the market you could buy that would be more than adequate. 2, most people who pick this up will find it very hard to control and their soft game will probably suffer. 3, the sweet spot could be better. It did improve with lead tape, but I would rank it below average. Off-center shots felt very poor, but what I will say is the more I used it, the less I noticed this as an issue. So some of it could have been an adjustment period, but it's definitely not as good of a sweet spot as something like the Hyperion. Overall, this paddle is for a very particular type of player. It's for those who want more power and have very soft hands, or for the banger who doesn't care about playing soft and just wants to hit the ball hard. The paddle's going to be very polarizing, just like the 002 and Power Air were. You're either going to love or hate this paddle, but even if you do hate it, I think if you use it enough, it's going to grow on you. While the soft game is very hard to get used to, if you dial that in, the rest of the paddle has a lot of appealing benefits that make it very fun to play with. I would highly suggest trying to demo it before you purchased one. So keep those in mind when deciding if this paddle is for you or not. Initially, everyone had a negative reaction to seeing the Black Ace specs and info, but honestly, I think everyone has it wrong. This is a top tier paddle with many appealing benefits, and I really enjoyed using it. I think the reason for that skepticism was from the Pro Spin Plus, but I don't think that carries over to the Black Ace. I think it's a really good paddle, and it's definitely worth checking out. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.